Graham. I'm a paranormal researcher who specialises in kind of trying to understand the paranormal from a scientific point of view. So my presentation is going to be about the theory that I'm interested in, but also connected to a bit of work that I'm doing myself around my IGFD laboratory experiment. So I'm going to move on, because I wanted to sort of talk to you about current mainstream physics understanding of our known universe. So how they describe our known universe is everything in our reality is physical. So that all is reality. So that all is physical is reality. Or is it?
When we hear the word paranormal, it is natural to think about ghosts and spirits of people who have crossed over to the other side. The thrill of the unknown leads much to the imagination, to who or what may be lurking within our homes and historical landmarks. For hundreds of years, we humans have been fascinated with trying to communicate with spirits, whether that is to contact dead relatives or to find out who or what is haunting a location. We have over the years developed a variety of different methods to help us communicate with the spirit world, from seances and Ouija boards to new and sophisticated technology, with the sole aim of proving the existence of ghosts within our four-dimensional reality. However, in over 100 years of paranormal investigation, and including the advances in technology and methods used to develop more effective means of communication, we still haven't come any closer to understanding the true nature of paranormal phenomena that we observe today. Does this then lead us to the question, have we got it wrong from the very beginning? Just looking for something that just doesn't exist as we currently understand it to be? Have we just been programmed from an early age to conclude that paranormal phenomena is the result of spirits of the dead? And would we then, if not programmed to connect paranormal phenomena with the conventional way of thinking, still come to the same conclusion? In order to truly understand the root cause for paranormal phenomena, we need to look further afield towards the stars in our distant universe. With the advancement of new space observatory technology, we are able to look back in time to the moment our universe was first created. This was the Big Bang. All matter and energy that exists comes from a singularity, of which we still do not know what this exactly is. We are constantly learning new and exciting things about our universe, some that were predicted by the one and only Albert Einstein in his theory of general relativity. It is when we start to truly ask the fundamental questions around our existence, who created our universe, we start to build the bigger picture and realise that some of the observable effects in our distant universe are unexplainable by current laws of physics which govern our four-dimensional reality. We also can ascertain that our universe is still expanding and accelerating, which would require some unknown forces to do so. As a result of new and more definitive scientific research, we are slowly coming to the conclusion that our reality as we currently understand it really doesn't comply by the laws of physics, and that all other observable, unexplainable effects we witness in our universe can also be observed much, much closer to home.
So that video is going to give you a kind of insight to where we're going to be going with this presentation today. So you'll kind of realise throughout the presentation I'm going to flip between paranormal phenomena and a bit more about cosmology. But just before I get going with the content of my presentation, I just wanted to give you a bit of background about my journey. And the reason I think that's important is because I got into the field as a believer in the paranormal, or ghosts and spirits, should I say. I believe in the paranormal, but my perceptions of what ghosts and spirits are has completely changed. And I want to know now exactly how paranormal phenomena works from a scientific point of view. So just to start the presentation off, I tried to find the best picture I had of myself, and this was the only appropriate one I could find. A picture of me as a ghost at a Halloween party. Quite often I didn't have that mask on, and at the time I had facial hair and long hair, and a lot of people thought I came as Jesus. But the other nice thing about this photograph is, this is around the year I actually started to get into the paranormal field. So that was also another appropriate reason why I put this one in there. So, like most people, I would say, probably had a keen interest in the paranormal from an early age. That was myself. It was when I started watching a TV program called Strange But True. Does anyone know that?
Yeah.
And do you remember the episode around the Enfield poltergeist? Yeah. Do you remember that scene with the rocking chair that comes into view? Yeah, that was a bit that really creeped me out, and I didn't sleep for weeks. My mum's here to vouch for that. So that kind of captured my attention with regards to paranormal phenomena. So I started reading books on it and so forth. That was it, as far as it went from that point of view. So many, many years later, say probably around my sort of mid-20s, I started watching videos on YouTube, and you know, like you do, you do poltergeist phenomena and so forth, whether it's fake or not is another matter. And as videos transitioned through YouTube, I started to come along to these episodes of Ghost Hunters Taps. And I really liked them. I really liked that show. I really liked, you know, the methods they used, the equipment they used, the processes that they followed in order to kind of conduct their investigations. So I just continued to watch these videos, and after a while, it just enticed me to kind of start purchasing my own equipment. So that's what I did. So I bought myself a K2 meter, which was very popular at the time, and a video camera, and I already had a digital recorder, and I started going out doing little paranormal investigations. So at this point, around 2010, me and a friend, we decided to run some local events at a haunted site near us, so we could do it a bit more often, and that's what we did for about a year. And it was during that time where I had some of my best paranormal experiences. It kept me into the field today, really. But I'll say I got to about a year into doing the events, and I became quite tired of it. I started to realise quite soon that I wasn't really benefiting from that process. You know, I had all this equipment that I invested in, and I wasn't getting to use it, and I spent most of my time trying to ensure that other people were enjoying their time on investigation. So I quite quickly decided at that point it was time to cut my ties with that and start a society. So I broke away, and that's when I started RSVP UK, Research Society to Verify the Paranormal. And this is what kind of, again, really kick-started our investigations. So I set up a small team, and we tried to document all the paranormal phenomena that we gathered, you know, and witnessed, you know, on our investigations. And we developed a case file document to actually record the data and the processes we followed throughout from the beginning to end of the investigation. And it was good. It was good having this log of data that we could present to clients at the end of an investigation to show them exactly what we did and how we did it. And they really appreciated that, and that helped us build a bit of a reputation. But I'd say, again, we got to a point a couple of years down the line where I started to realise, well, okay, it's great, we've captured some EVPs, some video anomalies and so forth, but what's that really telling me? It's not really telling me much about the phenomena that I'm witnessing and capturing. So I realised that maybe I need to start investing in data logger technology to try and understand the environment a bit more. So that's what we did. We built our own data logger. And it was great, you know, we was getting all these different, you know, we was getting sets of data from, you know, across the whole entire investigation, getting anomalies in the data and so forth. It was great. But again, we started to kind of realise that we didn't really quite understand what the data meant, because we had no model or understanding of what, you know, what was actually causing these fluctuations in the data. So it got to the point where I started to think, well, I no longer want to investigate the paranormal the traditional way, because it wasn't providing me with the answers I was requiring. So I decided to step out of RSVP UK and just to go independent. So that's when I started to kind of analyse what I was doing as, in the paranormal community. So I sort of reassessed the process again. So I said, well, what am I out to achieve? So I was out to achieve, obviously to witness like apparitions, light anomalies, disembodied voices, band footsteps, shadows, being physically touched, objects moving unaided, and radical drops in temperature and so forth. And what means did I have to kind of detect these, these anomalies? Well, obviously I had various meters, video cameras, and audio recorders. So if I witnessed these events and I captured these events on these mediums, then my only conclusion was it had to be a ghost and a spirit. But over my time of investigating, that didn't kind of add up to me, because I started to question, well, why does the ghost need to absorb the environment around it in order to manifest? Why is that necessary? What's the purpose of that? What's the science behind that? It didn't make sense to me. So one thing I did was, which was the biggest eye-opener for me, was I removed the ghost from the equation. And then this is the point where it started to open up pathways for me. Because now, I knew there were other areas of paranormal that I could focus my attention on in regards to research, whether that's like parapsychology or down the physics route. Okay, there was lots of different angles I could take. But this was another conundrum for me, because then, when I got to this point, I had no focus point of where I was going to drive myself. I didn't know what to do when I got to this point. And I spent a good year faffing around, not knowing exactly how I was going to what I was going to focus my attention on. And that drove me crazy, and kept me stumbling for a good year. And it wasn't until I started doing some decorating one day at home, when I put into YouTube paranormal science, and it came up with a radio interview of a gentleman called Thomas Fusco. And it was about his book called Behind the Cosmic Veil, around his theory of supergeometrics. And basically his book is around a new vision of reality merging science, spiritual and supernatural. So I listened to this 2.5-hour interview while I was doing my decorating work, and I was blown away with what he had to say. How he described all these paranormal effects and how he could explain them scientifically. How they would merge, a whole sight. And it was this point where I realised I had my focus point. I actually had a framework now to work from, because he's given me one. So his book, his theory here, is a theory of everything that incorporates paranormal phenomena. There's a big body of data that we can capture to kind of explain certain predictions made under this theory. So Thomas's work is based over 30 years of work, of research, predominantly built up around various topics within physics. So some of the main key areas for his theory are Albert Einstein's general relativity theory, Theodore Kaluza and Oscar Klein's KK theory, John Archibald Wheeler, pre-geometry, David Finkelstein's coherent superpositions, David Bohm's implicit and explicit order, and then we've got the Nathaniel Rose and Einstein's, which is the Einstein-Rosenbridge wormhole theory. I think most people have heard of the wormhole theory. It's not necessarily directly connected to his work, but the effects of this theory have a similar connection, so hence why I've incorporated that as well. So, has anyone heard of this theory before? No? Okay. Well, supergeometry is basically expressing how things can occur without it kind of complying with the laws of physics in our four-dimensional reality. So, what I have here, to try and best explain it, is this cube here, this three-dimensional cube, is to represent what we deem as our four-dimensional reality. So four-dimensional reality is defined by, 3 dimensions: height, width, and depth, and temporal, which is time. So that's how we measure things. That's how we, that's how we live. It's the laws of physics that we abide by. It's all connected to 4 dimensions: space and time. So our physical universe had to come from somewhere, and it didn't just come out of nothingness. There had to be some sort of creator, or somewhere we're creating the matter that comprises our physical universe. So Thomas knew that he had to find something outside what is deemed our physical universe. So he came up with a fifth dimension. It's not really a dimension, but it's a fifth state, which is what he calls the non-physical, which is, under his theory, is called the omniverse. Now, the omniverse is basically an information state where all the information of our existence comprised of exists. This is not a physical state. It does not comply by our laws of physics as we know. It's just an information state. The patterns of information exist. The blueprints of our existence, we could say. So this picture here is to define. So we have that physical cube in the previous slide. This is here to represent the design, the pattern, the information that makes up that physical cube. But we need something, we need a process to turn that information into what's physical. So there's an extension of the omniverse. So the process it has to go through from this information to physical is what he calls the patchiverse. Now I've used here a 3D printer to kind of define a kind of, to give you a visual sense of what I'm kind of referring to. So that information that comprises our existence has to go through that process to manifest and materialise. So as it does with regards to 3D printing, it takes that digital information and it processes it and then starts to materialise a physical cube. That's kind of how the patchiverse works. It's a driving force for materialising information. So here we've got the universal process from intelligent information to materialise as matter in our known universe. So again, we have here the omniverse, the patchiverse, and the physical universe. Now the one thing that is a stumbling block for us here is that we only have the means or the ability to detect what's physical. Okay? We have no means to detect this and this. So, in order to understand as much as we can about the mechanics of this, we have to find the earliest point where the activity emerges within our physical universe. So that point in this process is here. Okay. So this is what we define as the earliest point possible of detecting the physical effects from this process. And this is what this reference arrow defines what we call the light barrier, the light speed barrier. Okay? Nothing can travel faster than the speed of light. Basically what they're saying, anything that travels at the speed of light collapses into a singularity. Yeah? Past, present and future collapses in on itself. So the light barrier is that point. So anything that goes sub-light speed then becomes physical. So in a second I'm going to play a brief video of Thomas Fusco talking about his theory, which kind of gives you a brief description, more than what I can describe to you, about this theory.
My name is Thomas Fusco. I'm an independent researcher. I've been called a visionary theorist, but I'm actually more involved in theoretical cosmology as it relates to certain supernatural and anomalous phenomena. I got started out in this field as a result of a number of personal experiences I had in my late teens and early 20s. And I would call them parapsychological experiences that were quite profound and caused me to call into question the nature of reality that I was taught at school. These type of events didn't fit in those models. And so for me, the compelling question became, how is the universe put together that would allow these kinds of things to occur? Because the current models that we have wouldn't accommodate them. And so that started me on my journey to discover a new way of looking at reality and a new scientific model. And that gave rise to the theory of supergeometrics that's told about, that I explain in my book, Behind the Cosmic Veil. To explain some of the details of that, what we're looking at is that it became clear to me early on that what I call a two-state model of reality is not adequate. This is what we might call materialism. It is the fundamental paradigm of modern physics, that reality is what is physical. But what is physical is reality. They're synonymous. and nothing lays outside of that. But it became apparent to me that that's not adequate. So what I developed was a model, a conceptual theory of everything that accommodated 3 states of reality. And we therefore have something that is superphysical, or what I call supergeometric, which is the first state. And it has gone by a lot of different names over the centuries. Everything from the heavenly realms to the spirit realm. Edgar Casey called it the Akasha. David Bohm, physicist David Bohm, called it implicate order. David Finkelstein called it coherent superpositions. There's all different kinds of names for it. But I needed something that was not only descriptive, but also was much more specific in what it implied. So we have these 3 states, which we could call the supergeometric or the superphysical. We have the quantum state, and then we have the relativistic state. And this is that 3-state reality. And through this particular model, we're able to solve certain problems that the normal materialistic model of quantum state, relativistic state, and nothing else just simply can't solve. Well, an example of how this different model with these 3 states can make a difference in how we understand things is that if we first take a look at what physics proposes today, which is this 2-state reality. We have the quantum state, which is the microscopic state. We have the relativistic state, which is the macro state, the relativistic model of Einstein. And so these 2 jockey with each other, and they describe different qualities of reality. And where you have the quantum state, I mean, most of our listeners are going to know that they've heard of the very strange things that go on at the quantum level that seem to have no correlation with the laws and principles that govern the relativistic state or reality at large, so to speak, that we normally deal with. And these 2 are in opposition of one another. And one of our major problems in physics, we haven't been able to resolve these, to reconcile them. But with this 3-state reality, if we have a non-physical or pre-physical state on this one side, what I call the supergeometric realm, we have the other side with the relativistic state, and we can look at that as a state of reality that's fully physicalized, fully materialized. Now suddenly, we see the center state, the quantum state, as a transitional state between what is not yet physical to the center state, which is something in the process of becoming fully physical, to the relativistic state where everything is fully materialized and physical. Now, when we look at this middle state of the quantum realm, we can begin to understand in a very sensible, tangible, easy to grasp way that we're actually looking at a state of physical reality that's in the process of materializing. And since it's not fully materialized, this is why it acts in the strange ways that it does. And it's very easy to understand those states based on that concept, but without the idea that there is actually something before the quantum state that transitions through that quantum state. It's very difficult to figure out what's going on there. So that's a really good example of how this model helps us understand aspects of reality that we couldn't do so before. Yeah, folks can find out more about my work, my book, at my website. I have related articles, a sample chapter of the book, my blog, and of course where I'll be appearing next on an interview, and of course a link on where to obtain the book, where to buy the book. All that can be found at www.cosmicveil. It's one word, and the veil is spelled V-E-I-L, cosmicveil.com.
regards to at any point. He's got plenty of interviews on YouTube where he talks much more in depth about his theory. A couple of them actually where we're on the radio together talking about it. So if you get a chance, have a listen. But we're going to go back to talking about paranormal phenomena now. Okay, because you're probably thinking, what the heck is this all got connected to? Why are we talking about all this cosmology and so forth? Well, we're going to look at that again in a bit. But let's go back to the haunted location. So can people here just throw out to me, what sort of environmental effects are we looking to try and kind of gather data on and detect at a paranormal site when we do an investigation? Can anyone just throw a few at me now? Yes?
Temperature drops.
Temperature drops. Anything else?
EMF fluctuations.
EMF fluctuations. Anything else? Okay, that's fine. So, as you've described already, yes, one of the effects are EMF fluctuations in the electromagnetic field. This is probably what we deem to be the predominant one in the paranormal field at the moment. We also have changes in barometric pressure. Okay, it's probably not a predominant one within the field that people try and gather data on, but it is relevant. And then we have, like you said there, temperature fluctuations too. Now these are the main three that we spend most of our time trying to gather information and data around on a paranormal investigation. Because these are the ones that we seem to associate with ghosts and spirits when they're trying to manifest. They absorb the energy of the environment, hence why we get temperature drops, EMF fluctuations, and potential drops in air pressure. Okay? But what if I told you, if none of these three were a predominant effect at a haunted site? Because I know from all the gadgets and everything that everyone focuses on is always around predominantly the electromagnetic field. But this is not correct. This is not what we call a primary effect. This is what we call a secondary paranormal effect. So all these effects that we witness on a paranormal investigation are the effects and the cause of something other than that, the primary effect. The only problem we have is that when we're investigating, we don't know the primary effect that we're looking to detect and measure. Okay? And that's been a problem for us, a stumbling block in trying to understand the mechanics of paranormal phenomena. Hence why we haven't really developed much further forward with understanding it from a physics point of view. Because we get all these effects that emerge out of nothing. Okay? And if we have no logical explanation for these fluctuations, we automatically assume it's the ghost and the spirit. And no, there is another explanation under this model. And it is connected to the primary effect that occurs to cause these secondary effects. So what is the primary effect that causes the secondary effects? So we're going to look at the four universal forces as they're described. It makes up our known universe. So we've got here again, electromagnetism. We have the strong nuclear force and the weak nuclear force. And then we have gravity. There's just one problem with this. One of them doesn't fit this model. We're currently under what we know and we can confirm anyway. And that is gravity. Gravity is deemed to be a force under physics, but there's no actual evidence to support this. Because electromagnetism, the strong nuclear force and weak nuclear force, all have a propagating wave of frequency and amplitude. That's detectable, it's measurable in our four-dimensional reality. Gravity doesn't. Gravity doesn't have this. Gravity doesn't have a particle, doesn't have a propagating wave of frequency and amplitude. People here, I bet you've heard of a thing called a graviton, or some of you have heard of a graviton? Yeah? There's no evidence that a graviton exists. It's required. So then that really does lead us to the question, doesn't it? Do we really understand gravity?
When Albert Einstein produced his theory of general relativity, it changed the way we look at the universe and how it works forever. Einstein predicted that gravity is the product of depressions in the fabric of space, created by stars, planets, and galaxy clusters that attract smaller objects of mass to orbit within the space-time depressions. Einstein made a prediction that light would bend around the curvature of space-time because the depression would dictate the direction of light. This scientific prediction would go on to be proven when astronomers observed a solar eclipse many years later. Einstein also predicted this effect in the far reaches of the distant universe on a much larger scale. With the introduction of the Hubble telescope, astrophysicists have been able to observe the bending of light around galaxy clusters just as Einstein predicted in his theory. This observable gravitational effect is known as gravitational lensing, which in some cases causes amazing optical illusions in many shapes and forms. However, in physics, every local physical effect must have a local physical cause. Strangely, astronomers have observed 90% more gravitational effect than there is physical mass in the universe to explain it. In order to explain this local physical effect, physicists require some form of substance that fits the physical model. So they hypothesized an undetectable form of matter called dark matter. Established science talk about dark matter as it is a foregone conclusion it exists. However, there is no physical evidence to support dark matter even exists, and without this material, it creates a stumbling block for the established physical model. So then, if dark matter doesn't exist, then surely we do not have a scientific explanation for this gravitational effect we are able to observe. If we cannot explain gravitational lensing with a physical explanation, then we can only conclude that gravitational lensing is a form of paranormal phenomena. Local physical effect with a non-local cause. So this leads us to the question, what is the true explanation for the cause of gravity?
So for me, that video is quite interesting because it kind of gives us an idea now that actually we're not being told the exact truth with regards to understanding the true origins of gravity. You'll probably see documentaries where physicists talk about gravity and the physical properties of gravity as if they exist. They've got proof, undeniable proof. Where this is actually not the case. But physics requires this invisible matter and this invisible energy in order to explain gravity under a physical model. Without that, they have no understanding and they cannot incorporate it into the laws of physics. So, one of the things I want to do just now, Carl, if you can switch the lights for me. Just help me adjust for a second. Is, first of all, I think we need to understand from Einstein's point of view and his work on general relativity. So I have developed a little practical demonstration to kind of give you an idea to describe how Einstein describes gravity as it currently is known in physics. So I will need 2 volunteers, please. No? What? Oh, okay, yeah, thank you very much. Make yourself, thank you. Okay, so these lovely ladies here, sorry, lovely names, Tracy and Leanne, are going to hold this lovely sheet of latex that I've brought. Okay, so just hold each corner of it, please, and just try and stretch it out. Not too much, just a bit further, a bit more. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Can everyone see that? Okay. Yeah. Okay. So this is the best material I could find to describe what Einstein calls, a substantive field, okay? The fabric of space. And this is quite often a popular tool to describe gravity under its current model. So that's why we're using that. So, Einstein says, under his theory of general relativity, that it is matter and mass that creates gravity. And how it does this is that the space is a substantive field, okay, and it can bend, twist, and so forth. But at the moment, it's just a flat fabric of space, Okay, so there's not going to be any gravity here because there's no means for that. So we need a body of mass in order to create gravity. So this ball of Play-Doh here, which I'm now making into a sphere, I'm going to put this ball in the middle of the sheet. Now you can see that the latex sheet, which is representing our fabric of space, now has created a depression. Okay. So as you can see here, so basically what's happening is we have a body of mass that is now warping the space around it, which is now creating that gravity that we know. Okay. So this is required. Okay. So under Einstein's theory of general relativity, it is matter that is required in order to cause gravity. Hence why Earth is likely so forth. Okay. Yeah. Creates that depression in the fabric of space. Hence why we have gravity. Thank you very much, ladies, for that. Round of applause. So, let's move back to, let's go back to the universal process from intelligent information to materialise as matter in our known universe. So again, we've got the omniverse, red dot here. We have the patchiverse, and then we have the physical universe. And what's interesting about this is that it kind of represents this. This is an image of the Big Bang and the space expansion. Okay? And how physics describes how we came into existence is that we came from a singularity. Okay? It was infinitely dense and infinitely small. And what happened was this Big Bang occurred, and it just spat out all this matter as into our known universe as it is today, and the singularity just disintegrated at the point of the Big Bang. So there's no more singularity. Okay? But there's one issue with this, is that before matter appeared at the point of the Big Bang, we had gravity. Now gravity emerged before matter. So then that leaves us with a bit of a question then, doesn't it? If Einstein's theory of general relativity says that matter is the cause of gravity, then why was there all this gravitational effect before matter presented itself? So we have to start thinking, do we need to rethink that model, or that idea of gravity? So, Carl, if you can switch the lights again. Allow everyone to adjust their eyes again. I need 2 volunteers, or the same ones, or another 2 volunteers to come up for another practical demonstration. No? Is it? Okay. Thank you very much. Okay, so we're going to describe gravity under Thomas Fusco's theory of supergeometry. And now this is relevant to kind of explain where we go from this. So what Thomas says is gravity isn't a product of matter, it's that matter requires gravity to present in our four-dimensional reality. So basically gravity is the driving force for information to move into our four-dimensional reality. So basically this ball here, Play-Doh, is gravity applied from this non-physical world into our four-dimensional reality, pressing it, compacting it into physical matter as we know today. So how this works from a fabric of space point of view, I have a little demonstration tool here. So we're going to go back to Einstein's. We might have to stretch it out just to hold it in places. Yeah. So Einstein says that matter creates gravity, creates a depression in the fabric of space to cause gravity. However, we know that that's not correct, so we need to obviously re-evaluate that. So under Thomas's theory, okay, it is that a bending of space in our four-dimensional reality needs to occur in order for physical matter to materialise. So before the matter materialises, this bubble of space, it worked much better at home. Carl, you'll vouch for that, won't you? Well, it's not working. So I'm just going to go with all the maths instead. It does. It worked so well when I did it at home. It just stretched it out. So yeah, so basically, a bubble emerges within the fabric of space now. This empty void. And what happens is that void needs to materialise before physical matter can exist in our four-dimensional reality. Okay? So hence why we now have the same depressions in the fabric of space as described under Einstein's theory, but we now know it isn't matter that causes gravity, it is the product of the bending and warping of space and time that is required for matter to present in our four-dimensional reality under this model. Okay? So thank you very much again. Can we have a round of applause for our two questions? So again, you may ask the question, well, what's this got to do with paranormal phenomena? Well, paranormal phenomena has to be physical, because we won't be able to observe it, feel it, detect it. Okay? It's a physical effect. But we know that paranormal phenomena, can present itself and then, materialise and then dematerialise unaided without any kind of known physical cause. So it's the source we need to identify. So Thomas, when contacted a couple of physicists that specialise in general relativity, and he said, what effects on the environment would occur if there was to be a localised bending of space on Earth? So say in a haunted paranormal site, what sort of effects would occur if there was a bending of space? Didn't say anything to do with paranormal phenomena, he just said what effects would occur if it was happening on Earth. Because we know that in space, not a lot would occur, so there's not enough, there's no matter in space to create any kind of disturbances. So Thomas was really, really flabbergasted when he heard what the physicists described to him. So he heard the physicists describe and say that there would be an emerging electromagnetic field. Because what will happen is that the bubble of space will affect the electrons in the atoms. So basically exciting the electron in the atom, because it's compressing and impacting it, to a higher orbit. And what this does is then that creates an emerging electromagnetic field. So hence why on the investigations we can have no fluctuations at all, but we might have one occurrence that just materialises unknowingly. This process can explain that if his model is correct. We'll also have air pressure changes, because with the expansion of space it will create an area of low pressure. So we know that air pressure is basically where we get like wind goes from areas of high pressure to low pressure. Hence why we might get mystery breezes on paranormal events and so forth. Yeah. And then we also get temperature fluctuation, because depending on the rate of the expansion of this bubble of space and time, there will be a difference in changes in temperature. So you may experience colder temperatures in that region of the expanding bubble of space to the existing environment around it, until it obviously equalises out and so forth. So again, we have all these effects here. So these are the secondary effects from the primary effect. But we have the primary effect now, so we have a means to better understand what's going on in our local environment when we're doing paranormal investigation. Because we know that if we observe it, we hear it, it has to be physical. Whether or not the source of it is physical is a different matter. But if we observe it and hear it, it has to be physical. So there have been experiments conducted with regards to EVPs. And under this model, it describes that you can capture an EVP in a vacuum chamber. Now, most microphones require an acoustic diaphragm to capture, audible phenomena. But in a vacuum chamber, there's no air molecules to affect the acoustic diaphragm. But you can still capture these EVPs. So like Lee said in his presentation earlier about, the microphones, the magnets. So inside a microphone is a copper coil. Basically, the electromagnetic field, or the EVP, where it's emitted, is detected on the copper coil. There's also, as well, that he predicts that there will be time dilation when these things will occur. And there is actually a person in the US that has conducted an experiment where he was pinging two signals, two different signal process generators, back and forth, and he detected a slight change in time during the paranormal manifestation. So we now need to develop ways of detecting this gravitational change, because we now have a framework to work with. We now know the primary cause of paranormal phenomena under this model, if it's correct. Now, with like any theory, like Einstein's theory, he had to develop an experiment in order to test his theory, to find evidence that proves his theory. And so does this one as well. So he says, during the early onset of a paranormal manifestation, an emerging bubble of space-time needs to occur in a local site. That's great, but how do we detect that? What do we have to detect this emergence? Well, that's where my work has now come into this presentation. Because I put together, over a period of time thinking about it, I developed something called the IGFD, the Independent Gravitational Field Detector Laboratory. This is an experiment that is solely designed in order to hopefully detect this emergence of this gravitational effect. Because it's not a change in the force of gravity applied as we know it, as a downward force. This is an independent field. So we're going to observe these changes in all different directions and axes. So this is what I developed. This is basically a diagram of the experiment. So what we have here, we have four sensors that are set up, say, in a room, in a haunted location. So put it in a grid formation. So we set up a detection area. So the aim is that we want to detect in these four regions this emerging gravitational field. And hopefully it correlates with any kind of witnessed activity or captured activity on other mediums and so forth. So all these sensors then are connected to a network system that then means that I can remote view the data coming in from another room, which means that I have means to then close off that room to avoid any potential contamination that may affect the data that I'm getting. So here are some of the images I have of this experiment where I've taken it on test runs. So here, what it was a free sensor setup. So as you can see, it's in a triangle formation. So basically, in this location here, this was a very known spot for apparitions to present at this local theatre. So I set up the experiment in this formation to have the best opportunity of trying to capture that event occurring, so I could get the data. Again, in another location in that haunted theatre we were in, is a closer view of the experiment, plus we have a microphone set up in order to capture any kind of EVPs that we make in connection to kind of correlate with. And then this is kind of the observatory kind of headquarters, or HQ we refer to, in order to monitor the data coming through. So this is kind of how it looks when I'm kind of monitoring the environment as it's emerging, or hoping to emerge, or see the effects of this. It might be a bit unclear on the screen, but you'll see that we have two defining lines. Okay? So basically, these would be what we call our baseline, our control data. So we'll have, on one axis, our data will constantly be reading at 1G. And on the other two axes, we'll have data reading at 0G. Because gravity is only being applied to one sensor. So if this gravitational effect occurs, And it's quite difficult to understand whether or not we can detect something, because we don't actually know what region or how big the detection zone is going to be. It's going to be like finding a needle in a haystack, and it's going to take a long, long time to capture that data. But if it emerges, we will see changes in their readings from 0 on the 2 axes and the 1G on the 1 axis. So this is basically what it produces for me afterwards. This is my paranormal evidence. So this is just a tiny snapshot of what it captures for me, and it takes me hours to try and cipher through it because I get so much data it just crashes Excel when I go to process it and put it into graph form. I have to send it off to someone in order to process it. But throughout, like I said, I find this more fascinating than seeing photographs, videos, and EVPs. This gives me more information about what's occurring. So, what's required in order to conduct an experiment of this type? And I thought about this carefully, because I'm trying to do it as much as I can under controlled conditions as what science would require it to be. So I had to really think about what I would require, what sort of location would be needed. So this was my kind of criteria. So I needed a location for me that was locally accessible. And the reason why I wanted it to be locally accessible is because I need to get a hell of a lot of data. Okay? Now we're not talking over a couple of weeks, we're talking probably now over a couple of years. I'm already working with a team of people at the moment. One that was going to come here today with me, his name's Ashley Nib. I'm not sure if some of you know him, but unfortunately he couldn't attend. He's actually presenting at another conference with the SPR today, the Society of Psychical Research. So again, this is one of the things we identified as as a criteria. Another one here, it needs to be regularly accessible. Okay, again, because we need lots of data. It needs to be regularly active in paranormal phenomena. Because again, we want to make sure we're getting the best opportunities of capturing that data. Because we don't know what detection zones we're going to be able to detect here. So we need to obviously have as much opportunity as possible. We need controlled conditions. Any experiment needs controlled conditions. And this location, which under our criteria would require that. So I have sourced tonight, there is a perfect location I have sourced. I need to still try and work myself in there. We need multiple sets of data, like I said. We also as well need to set up an experiment that incorporates participants with human interaction. Okay. So again, with the team that I've got together working on this, we are devising an experiment at the moment, which we're doing interviews for it, that incorporates hopefully something in connection with physical mediumship. If there's a means to actually manipulate the environment around them to give us the best opportunity to detect these changes in the environment. So, what is the purpose and objective of this experiment? Okay, so the first thing is that we want to first of all detect this emergence of this gravitational bubble, or field, as we say. Then what we want to do is we want to gather as much data in connection with this as possible, and we want to collaborate that data with paranormal occurrences that we capture. So the hope is then, we will then know, say if we capture an EVP of someone saying yes, if we get that EVP again and again and again, we'd like to think that we have a set of data that is repeatable again and again and again to collaborate with it. Because once we have that data, we can start to kind of then understand how the environment changes. And then it could just be possible, if this theory is correct and these things occur, it could be possible to then develop means to manipulate the process ourselves. Rather than waiting for it to happen, is there means to make it happen ourselves. So we were talking, it was your guys' presentation, the first one, talking about the potential connection with UFO phenomena and paranormal phenomena. Again, very much talked about in this theory, okay? Because if there is a craft that comes and visits us on Earth, it needs to defy a lot of laws of gravity, okay? So obviously, again, the distance between galaxies and distant reaches of the universe, okay? It would have to be able to break the light speed barrier, travel faster than the speed of light. So it would need to have been able to manipulate this process. Okay? Also, to defy gravity, again, would have to manipulate the laws of physics to do so. So if we understand this theory, if it's correct, then where could this research lead us to? So, as Thomas describes it as, it has the potential to, so for example, we have third world countries and people are starving. So there could be a means that we could materialise this, food and regenerate food time and time and time and time again. So we should then be able to eradicate, people in the hunger in this world. We could also then, as well, not require the need of having light surgery, because we could change the pattern of information. So, for example, if someone had a cancerous lump, this theory, if it's correct, would be able to change that information, remove and change information so we can eradicate that cancerous lump. There's lots of possibilities, if it's correct, that could come out of it. And for me, it is a radical theory, and it probably boggles a lot of people's minds, it boggles my mind. But, like, for example, let's go back to Albert Einstein. For a long time, science was gravity. Was everything. He described space as an empty void. Okay? Then Einstein came along, came up with this radical theory of general relativity, and he said, no, space is not an empty void of nothingness, it's a substantive field. And people, for many, many, many years, discredited him and said, no, that's not correct. Didn't really listen to his work. And it only took for one person to say, do you know what, I'm going to test one of your experiments, to test the prediction made under your model, to see if that's correct. So what they did was, an astronomer set up telescopes to observe a solar eclipse, because what Einstein said was, he predicted that the starlight around the sun during a solar eclipse would be out of position by 1.8 millimeters. So they took these photographs of the sun during a solar eclipse, they got the pictures and they did the measurements, and Einstein was correct. His measurements, his calculations on his measurements were correct. So then he now had an experiment that proved a certain prediction made under his theory. And we are now starting to find that over the years, more and more of his predictions are starting to come true. For example, he predicted that when two black holes merge together, it creates a ripple in the fabric of space. But he didn't believe that these ripples in space would be detectable. But we know, I think 2015, we detected these ripples in space through the LIGOS experiment, which is basically a giant it's like an L shape of these giant vacuum tubes with laser beams going in both directions. And what they do is these lasers come back, hit the mirrors, come back and meet each other together. Okay? So they cancel each other out. Now what happens is that when these gravitational waves come past Earth, what it will do, it will affect the time the lasers return back to one another and create a delay. And this delay then obviously sets off a detector that then says, well, okay, this is potentially a detected gravitational wave. Now what they had to kind of identify is what other things could manipulate that data. They thought, well, earth tremors and so forth. So what they did was they created the same experiment on the other side of the United States. And what happened was in 2015, both LIGOS detectors detected this gravitational wave. Now, again, if there wasn't any testable means for this theory, we could still be in a place now where we wouldn't understand gravity as well as we do. Okay? It was because he made these predictions that we could test in order to try and get some evidence to support it. So, for example, Thomas's theory, he says that these gravitational bubbles should present during, a paranormal manifestation, because that's what's required for matter to present in our four-dimensional reality. So, for example, the information of an apparition, we see it because it's physical. okay, but it comes in and out of our known universe, okay? It just materialises and dematerialises. So an expansion of space is required for the matter to present in order to create the apparition. Okay? So going back to the model as well with this theory. So light anomalies, okay? So we talked about how the electromagnetic field is created from this process. So what happens is when the electron in the atom drops down to its lower state, it needs to release that energy. And what it does is it releases that energy in a particle of light, a photon. Now if there's enough of this occurrence in this environment to happen, what happens is we then can have a light anomaly appear out of nothing. Okay, because there's enough photons being released from this drop in an excited state in the electron. This is how light emitting diodes work, LEDs. It's an interesting process and an interesting concept. For me, I felt there was enough here for me to want Warren investigating it further and developing means to try and understand it. Because nothing else has given me a real good framework to work from. And I know it's a very radical theory, but for me, it's worth giving it a shot. I might not be the right man for it, but I'm going to give it one hell of a shot. And my aim is to gather enough of this data to say to the scientific community, come on guys, come join us, get involved. Because we need them to give us the full understanding on it. But they're not going to play ball because they still won't shift from their paradigm of the four-dimensional reality. Everything has to be physical. They're not going to move away from that unless we give them means to do so. Hopefully this theory does it. Thank you very much for listening, and if you have any questions, that'd be great. Yep.
Just one question.
Yep.
You say you've been doing this data for like years.
I haven't.
Oh, right.
I haven't had a lot of means to do it. It's quite an early stage for me.
What do you find there's more with, you know, like the moon gravitational and solar storms and stuff like that? Do you get any difference in the data, or is it just the same?
Because I wouldn't detect it with that. What I'm detecting is what is a completely independent field from what we know is our It's basically an independent field occurring within this local environment. Not basically changing the levels of gravity that we feel.
Right. Okay.
It's an independent field, so it basically could be this independent field just emerges here, but not here.
Gotcha.
Yeah?
Okay.
It's a localized bending.
Okay.
Hence why, because at the moment, with regards to the sensors, it's only the sensors are on 3 axes. Yeah. And gravity is only applied to one sensor because we only feel the force downward towards the Earth's surface. Right?
Okay.
So that, we'd only detect fluctuations in that. However, this is an independent field, so we would then detect it on all 3 axes. Yeah?
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Yep.
Just outside the box now, thinking, I've enjoyed what you've done there and what you've got like last 20 minutes. Looking at if medium or anybody can link in with the past and bring people through from the past. There's got to be a pocket of energy out there within the universe that we'll be able to jump ahead with, but we just haven't gone to that scope and we haven't gone to that field of picking up on the outer stepping ahead to go to the future. Because mediums see things ahead as well. Like the Twin Towers coming down many years ago was predicted. So there's got to be something there that we just need to go back to the Einstein theory and just go back to basics and rethink of tapping into that type of.
Absolutely. And I mean, again, so mediums have that ability. I'm not going to discredit that. That's right. There's enough evidence out there to support that's the occurrence. However, like we've said, under current physics, the Big Bang, okay, the singularity disintegrated at that point in the Big Bang. But under this theory, the singularity still exists. So it means that we have. So basically, past, present, and future is incorporated in this temporal, this dimension. Hence, where you would have a means to be able to tap into that. We don't know how, but that should be the potential. Hence, why you are able to maybe sometimes come forth with future information and past information, and current information that you wouldn't obviously know unless you observed it, but you're able to detect. And there has to be a means to do so. And it means that under this model, that will give you a means to be able to do that and have a better understanding of it.
Maybe a heightened field where you're working in and around somebody that's got that type of stuff, like put somebody in an MRI scan and then say what's going on and just using some type of different fields just to see if you can
Yes.
Either wire somebody up and just different types of experiments out there as well.
Absolutely, and that's one thing we're trying to do as well, is get people, you know, for example, mediums together to kind of, you know, put an experiment together to kind of test that, to see whether or not, you know, we can detect that information, okay? Because under this book, you know, Thomas, it has different definitions for paranormal phenomena, incorporating, what mental phenomena. He calls it transmentation, and it incorporates, you know, the sort of skills from a medium's point of view, how they get that information. Okay. So it should be incorporated as well into that model. Any other questions? No? Okay. Well, anyway, thank you for listening, guys.
Can you repeat it all again, please?
I wish I could. No, okay, if you haven't got any further questions, then I'll leave you guys to enjoy the rest of your evening now. Okay, thank you very much.